How's everybody today? This is a really big day in the life of the long winter that we're going to touch on today. Interestingly, having nothing to do with reading the long winter, yesterday I had a really lovely conversation with Karen Grassley following almost immediately following our reading yesterday. I gave her a call and congratulated her on her living on a prairie interview with Pamela Bob, and Karen really enjoyed being with Pamela in the interview and enjoyed the questions, and and we talked about all kinds of stuff. Apparently Karen, and she's been working on this for a long time, but I don't know, should I be tipping this? What the heck? I mean, news is news, and I'll just share it. I mean, Karen has a book that's going to be coming out next year. It's been written for a long time, but it's taken a long, these projects take a while to get together. So Karen has a book. I don't know what it's called, but I'm told that it's a very honest and thoughtful look back at her time on Little House, and beyond that, her life as a whole. And I think Little House fans will be very interested in what Karen has to say. I've always loved Karen, and I've always thought that she's one of the most beautiful women. She, in her time, and Karen is still very beautiful today at 72, but in her time, Karen was absolutely one of the most beautiful women working on television, and there was a serenity and a peacefulness about her work, a stability about her work that just really radiated. And I just loved watching her, and I admired everything she did. If you hear this blower going on in the background, it just happens that the gardener comes on Tuesdays and blows around the yard. So I apologize for that in advance. So you may hear a little blower in the background as we read. So today we continue on with the long winter, and one really long chapter and one medium chapter, but starting with For Daily Bread. And I think it's one of the more gripping chapters in the book, because you know that with every step that's taken, lives are at stake, and they're risking everything. Almanzo and Cap Garland are risking everything in order to hopefully find wheat and bring it back to the people of De Smet, who we've established are the Ingalls in particular, because we really followed them, are coming to the end of their rope. And so this is a very, very important time. For Daily Bread, the chapter is called. In the third night of that storm, a stillness woke Almanzo. The blizzard had stopped. He reached out through the cold to his vest hanging on a chair, got out his watch and a match, and saw that the time was nearly 3 o'clock. In winter's dark, cold mornings, he still missed his father's routing him out of bed. Now he had to rout himself out of warm blankets into the cold. He must light the lantern and stir up the fire and break the ice in the water pail himself, and he could choose between getting his own breakfast and going hungry. 3 o'clock on winter mornings was the only time that he was not glad to be free and independent. Once out of bed and into his clothes, though, he liked the early morning better than any other part of the day. The air was fresher then than at any other time. Low in the eastern sky hung the morning star. The temperature was 10 below zero. The winds blew steadily. The day promised to be fair. When he rode down Main Street on the hay sled, the sun had not yet risen, but the morning star had melted in an upward rush of light. The Ingalls building stood solid black against the endless eastern prairie covered with snow. Down 2nd Street, beyond it, the 2 stables with their haystacks looked small, and beyond them, Garland's little house had a speck of light in its kitchen. Cap Garland came riding up on his sled, driving his buckskin gelding. He waved to Almanzo, and Almanzo lifted his own arms, stiff in the weight of woolen sleeves. Their faces were wrapped in mufflers, and there was no need to say anything. 3 days ago, before the last blizzard struck, they had made their plan. Almanzo drove on without stopping, and Cap Garland swung the buckskin onto Main Street behind him. At the end of the short street, Almanzo turned southeast to cross the neck of the big slough at its narrowest place. The sun was rising. The sky was a thin, cold blue, and the earth to its far horizon was covered with snowdrifts, flushed pink and faintly shadowed with blue. The horse's breath made a white cloud above his head. The only sounds were the dumping of Prince's hooves on the hard snow and the rasp of the sled's runners. There was not a track on the waves of snow, not a print of rabbit's paw or bird's claws. There was no trace of a road, no sign that any living thing had ever been on the frozen snowfields, where every curve was changed and unknown. The gardener's just immediately outside and now he's walking up on the porch, and he is right outside the window, about 10 feet away. I'm going to let him blow immediately off and move on before I continue. Timing is everything. Let's see, thanks for maybe I should just look at a few of the comments that are being made. Okay, well, they're going by so fast now, I can't really see what's being written, but I'm so glad you're all communicating amongst yourselves while we wait for the blower to go by. Some years ago, blowers were made. There was an ordinance passed against gardeners using blowers because of precisely this kind of an issue, but the gardeners couldn't get their work done. You know, to sweep everything by hand would have just taken an enormous amount of time, so they couldn't do it. So slowly, over time, the blowers have come back. And I have to say, rarely is anybody in a position where they're reading on Facebook Live when the gardener is present. So, you know, what are you going to do? And he's a wonderful gardener, so I don't worry about a little blowing. Now he's out behind the house, but the patio door is open so I can hear it more clearly. All right, I'm just going to continue on. There was no trace of a road, no sign of any living thing had ever been on the frozen snowfields, where every curve was changed and unknown. Only the wind had furrowed them in tiny wavelets, each holding its own faint line of blue shadow, and the wind was blowing a spray of snow from every smooth, hard crest. There was something mocking in the glitter of that trackless sea, where every shadow moved a little, and the blown snow sprayed confused the eyes searching for lost landmarks. Almanzo judged directions and distance as well as he could, where everything was changed and uncertain, and he thought, well, we'll have to make it by guess and by golly. He guessed that he had struck the neck of the buried big slough, somewhere near the place where he crossed to haul hay. If he was right, the snow underneath the sled would be packed hard, and in 5 minutes or less, he would be safe on upland again. He glanced back. Cap had slowed the buckskin and was following at a cautious distance. With no warning, Prince went down. "Whoa, whoa, steady!" Almanzo shouted through his muffler, but he shouted calmly and soothingly, Only the horse's snorting head stuck up from the grassy air pocket in front of the sled. The sled ran on, sliding forward. There was no way to put brakes on a sled, but it stopped in time. Whoa, Prince, whoa, steady now, Almanzo said, drawing the reins firmly. Steady, steady, steady. Buried deep in snow, Prince stood still. Almanzo jumped off the sled. He unhitched the whiffletree from the chain fastened to the sled's runners. Cap Garland drove around him and stopped. Almanzo went to Prince's head, and wallowing down into the broken snow and tangled dead grass, he took hold of the reins under the bits. Steady now, Prince, old fellow, steady, 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 he said. For his own flounderings were frightening Prince again. Then he trampled down the snow until he could persuade Prince that it was firm enough to step on. Holding Prince by the bits, again he urged him forward till with a mighty heave he burst up out of the hole, and Almanzo led him rapidly climbing up out of the hole to the solid snow again. He led him on to Cap Garland's sled and handed over the reins to Cap. Cap's light eyes showed that he was cheerfully grinning under his muffler. So that's the way you do it, he said. Nothing much to it, Almanzo replied. Fine day for a trip, Cap remarked. Yep, it's fine. Large morning, Almanzo agreed. Almanzo went to pull his empty sled sideways behind the large hole that Prince and he had made in the snow. He liked Cap Garland. Cap was light-hearted and merry, but he would fight his weight in wildcats. When Cap Garland had reason to lose his temper, his eyes narrowed and glittered with a look that no man cared to stand up to. Almanzo had seen him make the toughest railroader back down. Taking a coiled rope from his sled, Almanzo tied one end of the sled's chain. The other he tied to Prince's whiffletree, and with Prince helping him, he guided the sled around the hole. Then he hitched Prince to the sled, coiled the long rope again, and drove on. Cap Garland fell in behind him once more. He was really only a month younger than Almanzo. They were both 19. But because Almanzo had a homestead claim, Cap supposed that he was older than 21. Partly for that reason, Cap treated Almanzo with respect, and Almanzo made no objection to that. Leading the way, he drove toward the sun until he was sure he had crossed Big Slough. Then he headed southward toward the twin lakes, Henry and Thompson. The only color now on the endless snow fields was a pale reflection of the blue sky. Everywhere, tiny glints sparkled sharply. The glitter stabbed Almanzo's eyes, screwed almost shut in the slot between his cap and muffler. The icy wool blew out and sucked back against his nose and mouth with every breath. His hands grew too cold to feel the reins, so he shifted the reins from hand to hand, beating the free arm against his chest to make the blood flow warm in it. When his feet grew numb, he stepped off the sled and ran beside it. His heart, pumping fast, forced warmth into his feet until they tingled and itched and burned, and he jumped onto the sled again. Well, nothing like exercise to warm you up, he shouted back to Cap. Let me in by the stove, Cap shouted, and he jumped off his sled and ran beside it. So they went on, running, riding, and thumping their chests, then running again while the horses briskly trotted. Say, how long do you keep this up? Cap shouted once, joking. Till we find wheat or hell freezes, Almanzo answered. You can skate on it now, Cap shouted back. They went on. The rising sun poured down sunshine that seemed colder than the wind. There was no cloud in the sky, but the cold steadily grew more intense. Prince went down again in some unknown little slough. Cap drove up and stopped. Almanzo unhitched Prince, got him up on firm snow, hauled the sled around the hole, hitched up again. See the lone cottonwood anywhere up ahead, he asked Cap. Nope. But I can't depend on my eyes, Cap answered. The sun glare made them see black spots everywhere. They rewound their mufflers, shifted the ice patches away from their raw faces. To the far horizon all around them, there was nothing but glittering snow and the cruel wind blowing. Lucky so far, Almanzo said. Gone down only twice. He stepped onto his sled and started and heard Cap shouting. Swinging in to follow, the buckskin had gone down. Cap dug him out, hauled the sled around the hole, and hitched up again. Nothing like exercise to keep a fellow warm, he reminded Almanzo. From the top of the next low swell, they saw the lone cottonwood, bare and gaunt. Snow covered the twin lakes and the low bushes that grew between them. Only the lonely tree's bare top rose up from the endless whiteness. As soon as they saw it, Almanzo turned westward quickly to keep well away from the sloughs around the lakes. On the upland grass, the snow was solid. The lone tree was the last landmark. It was soon lost again in the trackless waves of snow. There was no road, no trace nor track of any kind to be seen anywhere. No one knew where the settler lived who had raised the wheat. No one was even sure that he was still in that country. It might be that he had gone out for the winter. It might be that there had never been such a man. There was only a rumor that someone had told somebody that a man living somewhere in that region had raised wheat. One wave of the endless frozen snow sea was like another. Beneath the snow spray blown from its crest, the low prairie swells seemed to come on forever all the same. The sun slowly rose higher, and the cold increased. There was no sound but the horses' hooves and the rasp of the sled runners that made no tracks on the ice-hard snow, and the rushing sound of the wind that faintly whistled against the sled. From time to time, Almanzo looked back, and Cap shook his head. Neither of them saw any wisp of smoke against the cold sky. The small, cold sun seemed to hang motionless, but it was climbing. The shadows narrowed. The waves of snow and the prairie's curves seemed to flatten. The white wilderness leveled out, bleak and empty. "How far are we going?" Cap shouted. "Till we find that wheat," Almanzo called back, but he too was wondering whether there was any wheat in the endless emptiness. The sun was in the zenith now, the day half gone. There was still no threat. There was still no threat in the northwestern sky, but it would be unusual to have more than this one clear day between blizzards. Almanzo knew they should turn back toward town. Numb from cold, he stumbled off the sled and ran on beside it. He did not want to go back to the hungry town and say that he had turned back with an empty sled. How far do you figure we've come?" Cap asked. About 20 miles, Almanzo guessed. "Think we better go back?" "Never give up till you're licked," Cap said cheerfully. They looked around. They were on upland. If the lower air had not been a little hazy with the glitter of blowing snow, they could have seen perhaps 20 miles. But the prairie swells that seemed level under the high sun hid the town to the northwest. The northwest sky was still clear. Stamping their feet and beating their arms on their chests, they searched the white land from west to east as far south as they could see. There was not a wisp of smoke anywhere. "Which way will we go?" Cap asked. "Any way's as good as another," Almanzo said. They rewound their mufflers again. Their breath had filled the mufflers with ice. They could hardly find a spot of wool to relieve the pain of ice on skin that it had chafed raw. "How are your feet?" he asked Cap. "They don't say," Cap replied. "They'll be all right, I guess. I'm going on running." "So am I," Almanzo said. "If they don't warm up pretty soon, we better stop and rub them with snow. Let's follow the swell west a ways. If we don't find anything that way, we can circle back farther south." "Yeah, it suits me," Cap agreed. Their good horses went willingly into a trot again, and they ran on beside the sleds. The upland ended sooner than they had expected. The snowfield sloped downward and spread into a flat hollow that the upland had hidden. It looked like a slough. Almanzo pulled Prince to a walk and got onto the sled to look the land over. The flat hollow ran on toward the west. He saw no way to get around it without turning back along the upland. And then he saw, ahead and across the slough, a smear of gray-brown in the snow blowing from a drift. He stopped Prince and he yelled, "Hey, Cap! That looked like smoke ahead there?" Cap was looking at it. "Now, looks like it comes out of a snowbank," he shouted. Almanzo drove on down the slope. After a few minutes, he called back, Yeah, it's smoke all right. There's some kind of house there." They had to cross the slough to reach it. In their hurry, Cap drove alongside Almanzo, and the buckskin went down. This was the deepest hole they had got a horse out of yet, and all around it the snow broke down in air pockets under the surface till there seemed no end to their floundering. Shadows were beginning to creep eastward before they got the buckskin to solid footing and began cautiously to go on. The thin smoke did rise from a long snowbank, and there was not a track on the snow. But when they circled and came back on the southern side, they saw that the snow had been shoveled away from before a door in the snowbank. They pulled up their sleds and shouted. The door opened, and a man stood there, astonished. His hair was long, and his unshaven beard grew up to his cheekbones. Hello! Hello, he cried. Come in, come in. Where'd you come from? Where are you going? Come in. How long can you stay? Come right in. He was so excited he did not wait for answers. We've got to take care of our horses first, Almanzo answered. The man snatched on a coat and came out saying, well, come right along over this way. Follow me. Where'd you fellas come from? Well, we just drove out from town, Cap said. The man led the way to a door in another snowbank. They told him their names while they unhitched, and he said his name was Anderson. They led the horses into a warm sod stable snug under the snowbank. The end of the stable was partitioned off with poles and a rough door, and grains of wheat had trickled through a crack. Almanzo and Cap looked at it and grinned to each other. They watered Prince and the buckskin from the well at the door. They fed them oats and left them tied to a manger full of hay beside Anderson's team of black horses. Then they followed Anderson to the house under the snowbank. The one room's low ceiling was made of poles covered with hay and sagging under the weight of the snow. The walls were sods. Anderson left the door ajar to let in a little light. I haven't got my window shoveled out since the last blow, he said. Snow piles over that little rise to the northwest covers me up. It keeps the place so warm I don't need much fuel. Sod houses are the warmest there are anyway. The room was warm and steamy from a kettle boiling on the stove. Anderson's dinner was on a rough table built against the wall. He urged them to draw up and eat with him. He had not seen a soul since last October, when he had gone to town and brought home his winter supplies. Almanzo and Cap sat down with him and ate heartily of the boiled beans, sourdough biscuit, and dried applesauce. The hot food and coffee warmed them, and their thawing feet burned so painfully they knew they were not frozen. Almanzo mentioned to Mr. Anderson that he and Cap might like to buy some wheat. I'm not selling any, Mr. Anderson said flatly. All I raised, I'm keeping for seed. What are you buying wheat for? This time of year, he wanted to know. Well, they had to tell him that trains had stopped running and the people in town were hungry. There's women and children that haven't had a square meal since Christmas, Almanzo put it to him. They got to get something to eat or they'll starve to death before spring. That's not my lookout, said Mr. Anderson. Nobody's responsible for other folks that haven't got enough forethought to take care of themselves. Well, nobody thinks you are, Almanzo retorted, and nobody's asking you to give them anything. We'll pay you the full elevator price of 82 cents a barrel and save you hauling it to town into the bargain. I've got no wheat to sell, Mr. Anderson answered, and Almanzo knew he meant what he said. Cap came in then, his smile flashing in his raw red face chapped by icy wind. Well, we're open and above board with you, Mr. Anderson. We put our cards on the table. The folks in the town have got to have some of your wheat or starve. All right, they've got to pay for it. What do you take? I'm not trying to take advantage of you boys, Mr. Anderson said. I don't want to sell. That's my seed wheat. It's my next year's crop. I could have sold it last fall if I was going to sell it. Almanzo quickly decided, we'll make it $1. a bushel, he said. 18 cents a bushel above market price. And don't forget, we do the hauling to boot. I'm not selling my wheat, said Mr. Anderson. I got to make a crop next summer. Almanzo said meditatively, a man can always buy seed. Most folks out here are going to. You're throwing away a clear profit of 18 cents a bushel above market price, Mr. Anderson. How do I know that they'll ship in seed wheat in time for sowing? Mr. Anderson demanded. Cap asked him reasonably. Well, for that matter, I mean, how do you know you'll make a crop? Say you turn down this cash offer and sow your wheat. Hailstorms likely to hit it, or grasshoppers, and well, that's true enough, Mr. Anderson admitted. The one thing you're sure of is cash in your pocket, said Almanzo. Mr. Anderson slowly shook his head. Nope, I'm not selling. I like to killed myself breaking 40 acres last summer. I got to keep the seed to sow it. Almanzo and Cap looked at each other. Almanzo took out his wallet. We'll give you $1.25 a bushel, cash. He laid the stack of bills on the table. Mr. Anderson hesitated. Then he took his gaze away from the money. Yeah, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, Cap said. Mr. Anderson glanced again at the bills in spite of himself. Then he leaned back and considered. He scratched his head. Well, he said finally, I might sow some oats. Neither Almanzo nor Cap said anything. They knew his mind was quivering in the balance. Well, he said finally, I want to read that again. Well, he said finally, I might sow some oats. Neither Almanzo nor Cap said anything. They knew his mind was quivering in the balance, and if he decided now against selling, he would not change. At last, he decided, I guess I could let you have around 60 bushels for that price. Almanzo and Cap rose quickly from the table. Come on, let's get it loaded, said Cap. We're a long way from home. Mr. Anderson urged them to stay the night, but Almanzo agreed with Cap. Now, thanks just the same, he said hurriedly, but one day is all we have between blizzards lately, and it's past noon now, and we're already getting late started back. Now, the wheat's not sacked, Mr. Anderson pointed out, but Almanzo said, we brought sacks. They hurried to the stable. Mr. Anderson helped them shovel the wheat from the bin into 2 bushel sacks, and they loaded the sleds. And while they hitched up, they asked Mr. Anderson how best to get across the slough, but he had not crossed it that winter, and for lack of landmarks, he could not show them exactly where he had driven through the grass last summer. You boys better spend the night here, he urged them again, but they told him goodbye, and they started home. They drove from the shelter of the big snowbanks into the piercing cold wind, and they had hardly begun to cross the flat valley when Prince broke down into an air pocket. Swinging out to circle the dangerous place, Cap's buckskin felt the snow give way under him so suddenly that he screamed as he went plunging down. The horse's scream was horrible. For a moment, Almanzo had all he could do to keep Prince quiet. Then he saw Cap down in the snow, hanging on to the frantic buckskin by the bits. Plunging and rearing, the buckskin almost jerked Cap's sled into the hole. It tipped on the very edge, and the load of wheat slid partly off it. You all right? Almanzo asked when the buckskin seemed quiet. Yeah, Cap answered. Then for some time they worked, each unhitching his own horse in the broken snow and wiry grass, and floundering about in it, trampling and stamping to make a solid footing for the horse. They came up chilled to the bone and covered with snow. Here's a Garth Williams illustration. What they're going through. These guys are out in the middle of nowhere. They're at least 20 miles from home. They've got heavy sleds now. Their horses have already brought them 20 miles to this spot. They've already gone through the snow half a dozen times. So, you know, they say in a day's work, you'd like to get 2/3 of the day's work done before you break for lunch, because that last third is harder than the first 2/3, because you're tired and fatigued, and you know, that's just sort of a rule of thumb. That's certainly a rule of thumb in production. You want to get 2/3 of the work done before you break for lunch, if you can. And seeing and reading how these horses are now loaded down. They're each carrying 30 bushels of wheat. The sacks are 125 pounds apiece. Who's going to do the math on that quickly? 125 pounds times 30 bags. Or actually, no, I take that back. They're 2 bushel bags at 125 pounds each. So they've got 30 bags, 15 bags apiece is what they've got. What's the weight on that? Share that. Somebody do that math and share it. It's a lot of weight for these horses to be pulling. So they've each got, 7 or 8 bags. And if I've got that wrong, straighten me out on that. But I think that's what we're talking about here. They tied both horses to Almanzo's sled, then unloaded Cap's sled, dragged back from the hole, and piled the snowy 125-pound sacks onto it again. They hitched up again. It was hard to make their numb fingers buckle the stiff, cold straps, and gingerly, once more, Almanzo drove on across the treacherous slough. Prince went down again, but fortunately the buckskin did not. With Cap to help, it did not take so long to get Prince out once more, and with no further trouble, they reached the upland. Almanzo stopped there and called to Cap. You think we better try to pick up our trail back? No, Cap answered. Better hit out for town. We've got no time to lose. The horses' hooves and the sleds had made no tracks on the hard snow crust. The only marks were the scattered holes where they had floundered in the sloughs, and these lay east of the way home. Almanzo headed toward the northwest, across the wide prairie, white in its covering of snow. His shadow was his only guide. One prairie swell was like another, one snow-covered slough different from the next only in size. To cross the lowland meant taking the risk of breaking down and losing time. To follow the ridges of higher ground meant more miles to travel. The horses were growing tired. They were afraid of falling into hidden holes in the snow, and this fear added to their tiredness. Time after time, they did fall through the thin snow crust. Cap and Almanzo had to unhitch them, get them out, hitch up again. They plodded along into the sharp cold of the wind, too tired now to trot with their heavy loads. The horses did not go fast enough so that Almanzo and Cap could run by the sleds. They could only stamp their feet hard as they walked to keep them from freezing, and beat their arms against their chests. They grew colder. Almanzo's feet no longer felt the shock when he stamped them. That's not a good sign. The hand that held the lines was so stiff that the fingers would not unclasp. He put the lines around his shoulders to leave both hands free, and with every step, he whipped his hands across his chest to keep the blood moving in them. Hey, Wilder, Cap called. Aren't we heading too straight north? How do I know? Almanzo called back. They plodded on. Prince went down again and stood with drooping head while Almanzo unhitched him and trampled the snow, led him out, and hitched him again. They climbed on an upland, followed it around the slough, went down across another slough. Prince went down. You want me to take the lead a while? Cap asked. When Almanzo had hitched him again, save you and Prince the brunt of it. Yeah, that suits me, said Almanzo. We'll take turns. After that, when a horse went down, the other took the lead until he went down. The sun was low, and a haze was thickening in the northwest. Yeah, we ought to see the lone cottonwood from that rise ahead, Almanzo said to Cap. After a moment, Cap answered, Yeah, I think we will. But when they topped the rise, there was nothing but the same endless, empty waves of snow beyond it and the thick haze low in the northwest. Almanzo and Cap looked at it. Then they spoke to their horses, and they went on. But they kept the sleds closer together. The sun was setting red in the cold sky when they saw the bare top of the lone cottonwood away in the northeast, and in the northwest the blizzard cloud was plain to see, low along the horizon. Now, it seems to be hanging off, Almanzo said. I've been watching it from way back. Yeah, so have I, said Cap. We better forget about being cold and drive. Let's ride a while. Yeah, you betcha, Almanzo agreed. I could do with a few minutes' rest. They said nothing more except urge the tired horses to faster walk. Cap led the way straight over the rises, straight across the hollows into the southeast. Wait a minute. Into the teeth of the wind, heads bent against it, they kept going until the buckskin broke through the snow crust. Almanzo was so close behind that he could not avoid the hidden air hole. He turned quickly aside, but Prince went down near the buckskin. Between them, the whole snow crust gave way, and Almanzo's sled tipped, load and all, into the broken snow and grass. Darkness slowly settled down, while Cap helped Almanzo drag back the sled and dig out and carry the heavy sacks of wheat. The snow was plainly luminous. The wind had died. Not a breath of air moved in the darkening stillness. Stars shone in the sky overhead and to the south and to the east, but low in the north and the west, the sky was black, and the blackness rose, blotting out the stars above it, one by one. We're in for it, I guess, Cap said. We must be nearly there, Almanzo answered. He spoke to Prince and moved on ahead. Cap followed, and he and the sled, a bulky shadow moving over the dim whiteness of snow. Before them in the sky, star after star went out as the black cloud rose. Quietly, Almanzo and Cap spoke to the tired horses, urging them on. There was still the neck of the big slough to cross. They could not see the swells or the hollows now. They could only see a little way by the paleness of the snow and the faint starshine. 4 days blizzard. Now there's a time change here, and I'm not sure I'm following exactly what the time change is I read into this, but those of you who know this book really well know exactly what the time change is. But the chapter is 4 days blizzard. Here we go. So we've left the boys now, and we're back into town with Laura and the family. All day while Laura turned the coffee mill or twisted hay, she remembered that Cap Garland and the younger Wilder brother were driving across the trackless snowfields, going in search of wheat to bring to town. I don't know if Laura knows exactly when they set out on this journey. She knows they're going to do it. They've told everyone they're going to do it. They've made their plan, but we may have jumped back enough time here so that we don't really know. We don't know that Laura knows that they've left, is the bottom line here. That afternoon, she and Mary went out in the backyard for a breath of air, and Laura looked fearfully to the northwest, dreading to see the low-lying rim of darkness that was a sure sign of a coming blizzard. There was no cloud, but still she distrusted the bright sunshine. It was too bright. And the snow-covered prairie, glittering as far as eye could see, seemed menacing. She shivered. "Let's go in, Laura," Mary said. "The sunshine is too cold. Do you see the cloud?" There is no cloud," Laura assured her, "but I don't like the weather. The air feels savage somehow." "Well, the air is only air," Mary replied. "You mean it is cold." I don't either mean it's cold. I mean it's savage," Laura snapped. They went back into the kitchen through the lean-to entryway. Ma looked up from Pa's sock that she was darning. "You didn't stay out long, girls," she said. You should get fresh air when you can before the next storm." Pa came into the entry. Ma put away her work and took from the oven the loaf of sourdough brown bread, while Laura poured the thin codfish gravy into a bowl. Gravy again. Good, Pa said, sitting down to eat. Cold and the hard work of hauling hay had made him hungry. His eyes glittered at the sight of the food. Nobody, he said, could beat Ma at making good bread, and nothing was better on bread than codfish gravy. He made the coarse bread and the gruel of ground wheat flour. He made a coarse bread and the gruel of ground wheat flour with a bit of saltfish, and it seemed almost a treat. The boys have a fine day for their trip, he said. I saw where one of the horses went down to the big... Okay, so no, this is the day. So they are in the day of the trip, and they're having their big meal, their middle of the meal, and Pa has seen the holes in the snow where they went down. Okay, so we're in the same day now. The boys have a fine day for their trip, he said. I saw where one of the horses went down in the big slough, but they got him out with no trouble. Do you think they'll get back all right, Pa? Carrie asked timidly, and Pa said, well, no reason why not if this clear weather holds. He went out to do the chores. The sun had set, and the light was growing dim when he came back. He came to the front door, so they knew he had gone across the street to get the news. They knew when they saw him that it was not good news. Now we're in for it again, he said as he hung his coat and cap on the nail behind the door. There's a cloud coming fast. They didn't get back? Ma asked him. No, Pa said. Ma silently rocked, and they all sat silent while the dusk deepened. Grace was asleep in Mary's lap. The others drew their chairs closer to the stove, but they were still silent, just waiting. When the jar of the house came and the roar and howl of the wind. Pa rose with a deep breath. Here it is again. And suddenly he shook his clenched fist to the northwest. Howl, blast you, howl! He shouted. We're all here safe. You can't get at us. You've tried all winter, but we'll beat you yet. We'll be right here when spring comes. Charles, Ma said soothingly, it's only a blizzard. We're used to them. Here Pa is. Here Pa is shaking his fist at the howling wind. Pa dropped back to his chair. After a minute, he said, it was foolish, Caroline. It seemed for a minute like that wind was something alive trying to get at us. It does seem so sometimes, Ma went on, soothing him. I wouldn't mind much if I could only play the fiddle, Pa muttered, looking down at his cracked and stiffened hands that could only be seen in the glow of the fire from the cracks of the stove. In all the hard times before, Pa had made music for them all. Now no one could make music for him. Now no one could make music for him. Pa tried to cheer herself by remembering what Pa had said. They were all safe. They were there. They were safe. But she seemed to do something, but she wanted to do something for Pa. Then suddenly she remembered, we're all here. It was the chorus of the Song of the Freedmen. We can sing, she exclaimed. And she began to hum the tune. Pa looked up quickly. You've got it, Laura, but you're a little high. Try it in B flat. That's pretty good if he knows that she's a little high for the pitch. Pa was obviously quite the musician. Pitch and perfect pitch and relative pitch and perfect relative pitch is sort of what we're talking about here. When he says try it in B flat, Laura started the tune again. First Pa, then the others joined in, and they sang. When Paul and Silas were bound in jail, do thyself a no harm. One did sing and the other did pray, do thyself a no harm. We're all here, do thyself a no harm. We're all here, do thyself a no harm. If religion was a thing that money could buy, do thyself a no harm. The rich would live and the poor would die, do thyself a no harm. Laura was standing up now, and so was Carrie, and Grace was awake and singing with all her might. We're all here, we're all here, do thyself a no harm, we're all here, do thyself a no harm. That was fine, Pa said. Then he sounded the low note and began, "Der old Jim River I float down, I ram my boat upon the ground. The drift log come with a rushing din and stove both ends of my old boat in." Now all together on the chorus, they all sang, "It will never do to give it up so. It will never do to give it up so. It will never do to give it up so, Mr. Brown. It will never do to give it up so." When they stopped singing, the storm seemed louder than ever. It was truly like a great beast worrying the house, shaking it, growling and snarling and whining and roaring at the trembling walls that stood against it. After a moment, Pa sang again, and the stately measures were suited to the thankfulness they were all feeling. "Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, in the mountain of his holiness." And then Ma began, "When I can read my title clear to mansions in the skies, I'll bid farewell." It was past bedtime when the warmth died from the stove, and because they could not waste hay, they crept from the dark, cold kitchen through the colder, dark upstairs into the beds, under the quilts. Laura and Mary silently said their prayers, and Mary whispered, "Laura." "What?" Laura whispered. "Did you pray for them?" "Yes," Laura answered. "Do you think we ought to?" "It isn't like asking for anything for ourselves," Mary replied. "I didn't say anything about the wheat. It's only said to save their lives if it's God's will." "Well, I think it ought to be," Laura said. "They were doing their best. And Pa lived 3 days in that Christmas blizzard when we lived on Plum Creek." All the days of that blizzard, nothing more was said about Cap Garland and the young Wilder brother. If they had found shelter, they might live through the storm. If not, nothing could be done for them. It would do no good to talk. The constant beating of the winds against the house, the roaring, shrieking, howling of the storm made it hard even to think. It was possible only to wait for the storm to stop. All the time while they ground wheat, twisted hay, kept the fire burning in the stove, and huddled over it to thaw their chapped, numb hands and their itching, burning, chilblain feet. And while they chewed and swallowed the coarse bread, they were all waiting until the storm stopped. It did not stop during the third day or the third night. In the fourth morning, it was still blowing fiercely, no sign of a let-up. Pa said when he came in from the stable, "This is the worst yet." After a while, when they were all eating their morning bread, Ma roused herself and answered, "I hope everyone is all right in town." There was no way to find out. Laura thought of the other houses only across the street that they could not even see, and for some reason she remembered Mrs. Boast. They had not seen her since last summer, nor Mr. Boast since long ago time when he brought the last butter. "But we might as well be out on a claim too," she said. Ma looked at her, wondering what she meant, but did not ask. All of them were only waiting for the blizzard noises to stop. That morning, Ma carefully poured the last kernels of wheat into the coffee mill. There was enough to make one last small loaf of bread. Ma scraped the bowl with the spoon and then with her finger to get every bit of dough into the baking pan. "This is the last, Charles," she said. "Well, now, I can get more," Pa told her. "Almanzo Wilder was saving some seed wheat. I can get it through the blizzard if I have to." Late that day, when the bread was on the table, the walls stopped shaking. The howling shrillness went away, and only a rushing wind whistled under the eaves. Pa got up quickly, saying, I believe it's stopping. He put on his coat and cap and muffler and told Ma that he was going across the street to Fuller's store. Looking through the peepholes that they scratched in the frost, Laura and Carrie saw snow blowing by on the straight wind. Ma relaxed in her chair and she sighed, what a merciful quiet. The snow was settling. After a while, Carrie saw the sky and called Laura to see it. They looked at the cold, thin blue overhead and at the warm light of the sunset on the low-blowing snow. The blizzard was really ended, and the northwest sky was empty. I hope Cap Garland and young Mr. Wilder are safe, somewhere safe, Carrie said. So did Laura, but she knew that saying so would not make any difference. And that's the end of our second chapter. Wow. I don't know how they would have survived out there in that blizzard. And it's been a while since I've read this, so I don't remember, which is sort of cool. I really don't remember what's coming next. We'll get to it tomorrow when we continue, and this is really fun. Thank you for your patience with my reading, with characters and so on. But thank you, and this is really fun. We'll rejoin again, warm and safe wherever we are. Have a good rest of your day. Take care of yourself. Wash your hands. Wear your masks. Wash your social distancing. Be good. The long winter continues tomorrow. Take care. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.